What's up, guys? So in this video we're going to be discussing Madden 21 NFL yard prototypes and which one I think you guys should choose. Let's get into it. Alright, so first up we have the lock build. Now this is my personal favorite build. This is what I use. I think the speed on this is perfect. It's a little bit less than the fast cat, but I think it's totally usable, and I think it's the second best in the game. You can't really complain about that. The next thing that I like about this build is you can leave the AI, so you can click off and you can let the AI cover the man, and you can blitz with the other person. The AI will completely clamp the other person. On to the next one. Alright, so next up we have the fast cat build. Now this is my friend's personal favorite, and this is what he uses. The speed on this is the best in the game. As well as I don't think he fumbles that much. Now on defense he is a bit of a liability. He gets mossed a lot, and also it's hard for him to tackle people, especially like bigger Derrick Henrys, those types of people. But I do think this is a great build. It gets wide open on streaks, crossers, that kind of thing. On to the next one. Alright, so next up we got the Buffalo prototype. Now this is the personal quarterback build that I use. I love the speed on this. It's not as fast as the truss build, but it's fast enough. Can still scramble out of the pocket. Throw power is my favorite part of this build. He can make any throw. Like, he can throw it from one corner of the end zone to the other. It's perfect. The next part about this build that I think is great is he can pretty much make any throw. Like, crossbody. He can run up the field, catch for you a little bit. He's pretty good at that since he's 6'5". Yeah. Let's move on to the next one. Alright, so next up we got the Magician. This is great for people who, like to juke. They like to do skill moves. The speed is similar to the lock, where it's a little bit less than the fast cat. The carrying is great, so you won't really fumble when you're doing those juke moves. Coverage is a problem on this build. He gets mossed a little bit, but not as much as the fast cat, but he gets burned on like cutting routes, like post routes, slant routes, that kind of thing. He will get burned. So keep that in mind. Now let's move on to the next one. Alright, so next up we got the Raxilla build. So, this is a pretty good build. It's great for mossing people because it's 6'3", 225. Catching is good. Speed is pretty good. It's a little bit less than the Magician, but it's still pretty good. Now the problem with this build is if you like to throw like behind the back, laterals, that kind of thing, and you want to throw with this build, it's really bad at that. Like, my friend has one of these builds. We just don't throw it to him behind the line of scrimmage. It's a problem. But if you don't do that, it's a pretty good build. Alright, let's move on to the next one. Alright, so next up we got the truss build. Now this is a scrambling quarterback, so that means throw power is pretty good. Not as good as the Buffalo, obviously, but it is still pretty good. It makes most of the throws that the Buffalo does. The carrying is great, and that's important when you're, juking with this. That's the main thing of it. It's like a Magician, but throwing it. It's not as fast, I don't think, as the Magician, but it's still really fast. Catching is a problem. If you catch it and you get even tackled, he's probably going to drop it. So keep that in mind when you're picking this build. So let's move on to the next one. Alright, so next up we got the jacked up hybrid safety build. Now, the speed on this build is pretty good. It's not as fast as the Magician or the lock, but it's still pretty good. The zone coverage is why you would pick this build. The zone coverage is crazy on this build. Its catching is pretty good. Not great though. You can upgrade it. This hit power on this build is great. I love hitting people. with this build, especially with the Enforcer if you get it. Alright, let's move on to the next one. Alright, so next up we got the You Can't Guard Possession Receiver build. Juking on this build is pretty slow, not gonna lie, but the catching on this build is great. You know, it's a possession receiver, you expect that. The speed is pretty good. It is less than the raxilla receiver, that's why it's lower on the list. It's pretty much the same height as the raxilla. The route running and release is really good on this build. But yeah, not much else. I don't see why you would pick it over the lock or the raxilla, but let's move on. Alright, so next up we got the Zeus build. Now, this is a pretty weird build. I'm not sure what EA was thinking when they made it. Speed is okay. It's really not that good. I mean, it's middle of the pack at best. Catching on this build is great. You know, this build has a pretty good release, like explosion off the line. Hit power, don't try to hit stick with this build. Finesse running, like this build can actually like juke, which is really weird for a tight end. Coverage on this build actually you can be upgraded, which is really weird. I'm not really sure what EA was thinking with this build, but it's okay. Let's move on to the next one. Alright, so next up we got the Golden Arm build. I do think this is the worst quarterback build. Speed on it really isn't good. It's the slowest build in the game. You know, coverage actually can be upgraded on this, but it's still gonna get burned by pretty much any build because it's the slowest build. The only reason you would use this build is if you're playing man coverage and you can run this guy as your safety or your blitzer. The throwing on this is the only reason you choose this. The throw power is pretty good. It's a little bit less than the Buffalo, and speed isn't good. You already told you that so many times, and that's really important in this. Throwing accuracy is probably the best in the game, but I really wouldn't pick this build. Alright, so next up we got the blanket. It's similar to the hybrid safety build, but I really don't see a point in going with this over the hybrid safety build. You know, coverage is pretty good on this, zone coverage. Speed is, it can be upgraded, but it's honestly pretty slow. It's gonna get burned in man coverage. Hit power is great, but I don't think it's that important in this game. And hit power is good enough on the hybrid safety build. So honestly, just choose the hybrid safety if you're thinking about going with this build. Alright, let's move on to the next one. Alright, so next up we got the power linebacker, or the brick wall. Its height is pretty good, weight's pretty good, but I mean, this build's just not that good. I wouldn't choose it. The only reason you should be using this build is if you want to unlock Enforcer, which is done by doing the brick wall to, I think, level 12. Catching's good. Blocking's actually pretty good once you upgrade it. I just wouldn't choose this build. Like, what's the point? You're not gonna have fun with this build. Alright, let's move on to the next one. Alright, so next up we got the worst one, the Manimal. Just don't choose this build. It's slow. Blocking on it is good, but like catching in traffic is pretty good, but honestly, this build is just gonna get burned. It's the second slowest build in the game behind the Golden Arm. Yeah, just don't choose this build. I mean, route running's okay, just don't choose it. Alright boys, thank you for watching the video. If you made it to the end, please comment down below. We'd love to hear if you got to the end of the video, and if you're curious about anything, please let us know. Like, we'll be sure to answer in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We're out. Peace.